Hello, in this module we will be discussing dualism, which is the view that the mind is not physical. So briefly to remind us what we're talking about physicalism about the mind, which is that the mind is or can be reduced to fundamental physics. It is or can be explained or defined in terms of fundamental physics. And so in particular, mental states would just be brain states. And one way that one might understand this happening is, one possible form of this reduction is that we would think the mind is just an information processing machine, and information processing can be explained entirely in physical terms. So that would be a physicalist view. And the perhaps most prominent argument for physicalism is this causal argument for physicalism. It says that on the one hand, mental phenomena have physical effects, and on the other hand, only physical phenomena cause physical effects. So if mental phenomena cause physical effects, but only physical phenomena have such effects, then mental phenomena are physical. And why would we believe that only physical phenomena cause physical effects? Well, because on the one hand, we might think that every physical effect has a complete physical cause, and that on the other hand, every physical effect has only one complete cause. And so the only cause that a physical effect might have is a physical cause. And the physical realm is entirely sort of self-sufficient and autonomous, and nothing can intervene in it. And so if mental phenomena have effects in it, that means they're physical too. In this module, we will be looking at dualism, which is an alternative to physicalism. Dualism holds that the mind cannot be reduced to or explained by fundamental physics, at least not entirely, and there are at least two kinds of things, the mental and the physical. And so we've seen this trilemma, which says these things cannot all be true. The dualist says, well, mental phenomena aren't physical, that one's true, and therefore one of the other two elements of the trilemma must be false. Either mental phenomena don't have physical effects at all, or things besides physical phenomena can have physical effects. So either mental phenomena don't have physical effects, or they do have physical effects, but they're not physical, and therefore non-physical things can have physical effects. So before we're going to look at an argument for dualism called the knowledge argument, but before we look at that, we want to distinguish between what are sometimes called the easy and hard problems. They're actually both hard, but the hard problem is much harder than the easy problems. One idea that some people might have is that nothing about the mind can be explained physically. That's not what dualism says. Dualism says there's something about the mind that cannot be explained physically, that the mind cannot be entirely explained in physical terms. Parts of it can be, not all of it. And to help us see what the dualist might think can be explained in physical terms so that we understand what they think cannot be, that's what we're going to talk about right now. So there are so-called easy problems. What are examples of these easy problems? Well, there are things that you could learn about the mind through doing science, and presumably what you will learn about the mind in physical terms. So you might learn about neural correlates of different physical mental states. So you learn that you feel fear if and only if perhaps there's activity in the amygdala. We see the amygdala in that diagram on the right screen where that green dot is. Or maybe you have visual experiences if and only if there's activity in certain layers of the visual cortex. The visual cortex is where that red spot is at the back of the brain on the diagram on the left. So those are some kinds of things you might learn about the mind through physical investigation. You might also learn about perception. You might learn what causes accurate sensory experiences, what causes mistaken sensory experiences, and psychologists investigate illusions to understand how perception works. So for example, here's an image, and it sure looks like that checkerboard there's an A and a B square, and the A and the B square look like they're different colors. They look like the A looks like it's gray and the B looks like it's white. But actually that's an illusion. Here's this block of gray, and we're going to move it, and we see, oh, look, there's no barrier on the one hand between that block of this block is the same color as the A square, right? If you look, you can't see the edge anymore. But if you look down at the B square, you'll see, there's actually no edge between the B square and this block of gray either, and that shows us that the A and B squares are actually of the same color. So they don't look like they're the same color, right? The A square looks like it's darker than the B square. Not talking about the words, but the actual color of the square. Or the letters, we're talking about the colors of the square. but they're actually the same color. So what's going on here? Well, so apparent color, the way things look to us, that's a result of a lot of complex brain activity, and it depends in part on the actual color, but it also depends upon what the brain thinks is going on with the lighting in the scenario that it's looking at. So here that we get this illusion. The brain makes mistakes about the actual color of the squares because it makes mistakes about where it thinks the lighting is coming from. It thinks that the B square is in shadow, and it gets confused about what the implication of the B squares being in shadow is. So the point here is that a perceptual psychologist would investigate this phenomenon and would help us. It would help us to understand why different things have different color appearances, why some things look one color in one situation, another color in another situation. And that would be partially a physical investigation. There are lots of other kinds of of perceptual illusions. So there are audio illusions where you have one person making the same sound, but if you can see what their mouth is doing, depending on what their mouth is doing, it will sound like they are doing different things. So although you might think, oh, what do I think someone is saying? What does it sound like? That depends just on what I'm hearing. Actually, that's not true. The experience you have, the hearing experience you have, is determined not just by what the sounds that are hitting your ears, but also by the light that's hitting your eyes, that's coming off the person's face. What does it look like their mouth is doing? And you can see this examples of this on YouTube, and I've linked them in the module. Learning. What do we learn easily? What do we not learn easily? When are we capable of learning those things easily, and when not? Why? So, for example, it turns out that very young children's minds are really good at learning language, and as one gets older and older and older, that ability to learn language goes away. So the kids in this picture are super good at learning languages. You're better at learning languages than I am. So if there are any languages you want to learn, do it now, because your brain can still do it well. The brain ceases, slowly loses that ability. So what's going on with that? What is it in the brain that allows? What is it about the brain of a young child that allows them to learn language, and what is it about the brains as it ages that the ability to learn language radically shrinks? Study personality. We've talked about this before. So there's this idea, these are the big 5 traits of personality, and you discover that by doing experiments and measuring people's personalities in different situations and with different tests. Mental health would be an easy problem. So you might ask, for example, we know that physical exercise helps with depression and anxiety. There are lots of other mental illnesses it doesn't help with, so simply discovering that pattern is something you might discover through science. And then also, you want to know, well, why is that? What is it about physical exercise that's helping with depression and anxiety, and what are depression and anxiety that physical exercise can help with that? So you might be interested in cognitive improvement. How can we improve our learning abilities, our brain abilities, our focusing abilities? Neurobiology, we can learn about how axons work, about how neurotransmitters work, about how gene expression in the brain works, which parts of our DNA sequences turn on in the brain, which ones turn off in the cells in our brain. So there are all sorts of things that science might help us to investigate, to help us learn about the brain, to learn about the mind, how, in many ways, how they interact. How can we discriminate different sensory stimuli? How do we use that information to control behavior? How do we verbalize our internal mental states? What are the neural correlates in mental states? David Chalmers, a dualist philosopher, has called all these easy problems. And he's kind of joking. These are actually really hard problems, but he calls them easy problems to contrast them with what he calls hard problems. So the hard problem is the question of how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. And in fact, the easy problems are really hard. They require a lot of very challenging scientific explanation. The hard problem, at least right now, on the other hand, is not just really hard, but at least right now it's impossible. We do not know how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. The antiphysicalists, the dualists, they think the easy problems can be solved, right? So they do think that actually there's much that science can discover about the mind, that investigating the physical world helps us learn about the mind. They also think the hard problem cannot be solved. They think that the subjective quality of sensory experience cannot be physically explained. And they advance something called the knowledge argument to try to establish this point. And we might be wondering, what is this subjective quality of sensory experience anyway? And one function of the knowledge argument is to help us learn what they're talking about when they talk about the subjective quality of sensory experience and why they think it cannot be physically explained. And so that's what we'll be talking about in the next video.